Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting this morning. Today we have one item on our agenda. It's the expedited bill 4921, which is the Police Accountability Board, and the Administrative Charging Committee is established. I did want to announce that we do have I know we have a hard stop at 11:30. We might have, and one of our committee members is double checking exactly whether we have to leave earlier than that, but we will certainly honor that request as well. And as we begin, I'd like to thank the many groups and individuals who have testified, sent emails and letters to give their thoughts and suggested amendments. I'd also like to formally thank Senior Legislative Attorney Bob Drummer for preparing the packet, and he's going to be leading us through that packet. And I'd also like to thank the Office of Legislative Oversight Senior Legislative Analyst, Dr. Elaine Bonner-Tompkins, who drafted the Racial Equity and Social Justice Impact Statement. I'm going to ask President Albornoz and Councilmember Hucker if they have any opening statements, and if not, we're going to start working through this packet. So, Council President or Council Member, do you have any opening statements?
Sure. I think you correctly thanked everybody, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much to Dr. Bonner-Tompkins and everybody who had some role in preparing us for this. It was a really frustrating hearing, I gotta say, last week, and really disappointing to hear that level of frustration from key members of our community. The second hearing, and I think every witness had severe concerns about the bill and complaints about the level of public engagement and community input. And when I was in Annapolis last week and on previous calls, I've heard complaints both from the House leadership and Senate leadership that we've received a bill that doesn't comply with the spirit of the state law. So I wish we didn't have so much work ahead of us, Mr. Chairman, but we do. So I'm glad to get into it, but I really wish that there was a more collaborative process that got us here. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be talking about all the details. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Thanks. I think Councilmember Hucker said it well. It was a very frustrating work session to hear some of the concerns, because as we know, the transparency and the trust that has been established, or we tried to work harder to establish, is paramount to ensuring that law enforcement officials can do their work, that the community feels safe, that everyone feels that they're being treated equitably and reasonably. But having said that, I do think that the recommendations that have been made by many are very thoughtful, and still there is, through this work session and future work sessions, a tremendous opportunity for us to deliberate and discuss. And as I said during our last session publicly, I'm confident that many of those recommendations will be enacted, because I think they're reasonable and they do follow the spirit of what has been discussed in Annapolis. But as I also said in that work session, there is a time clock here that we have to be sensitive to. These group of individuals, this has to be advertised, they have to be recruited, and they have to be trained, and they have to be on board and functioning by the end of this fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. So one of the reasons why this was introduced when it was just prior to the holidays, and you can certainly debate that there should have been more interaction in advance of that, but this allowed us to be able to have two work sessions, to be able to have the racial equity impact statement, which is outstanding as always, in a timely manner that gives us the background and context to better prepare us for the conversation we're about to have. So I think that's important, and we should not lose sight of as well. So I look forward to this discussion. It's important, and I'm confident that all the recommendations will certainly be addressed, and that we will work through all of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did want to acknowledge, and I'm not sure if everyone is on the Zoom call as we speak, I believe many are, Police Chief Marcus Jones is here, Assistant Chief Darren Frank, Assistant CAO Earl Stoddard, the FOP President Lee Holland, Dr. Elaine Bonner-Tompkins, Chief John Fitzgerald from the Chevy Chase Village Police, Deputy Chief Andy Powell from Tacoma Park Police, and I've seen the police chief is here as well somewhere, or at least he was. Oh, there he is, Chief Tony Duvall. You know, on Zoom, people move around on you. So I saw you earlier, Tony, from Tacoma Park Police. Chief Mark Soroka from Gaithersburg Police, Lieutenant Ray Campbell from Gaithersburg, Lieutenant Sean Eastman from Gaithersburg, Lieutenant Chris Vance from Gaithersburg, Deputy Chief Laura Lanham from the Rockville City Police, and Chief Deputy Max Wee from the Sheriff's Department. And with that, we're going to ask Mr. Drummer to please lead us through this packet.
Okay, good morning. Like you said, we have only one item on the agenda today. It shouldn't take too long.
Yeah. Thanks. You don't predict football either, do you? Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I don't. This bill is a bill to implement the state law HB 670, the police accountability law that was enacted by the General Assembly last session. As Council President Albornoz mentioned, there is a time clock to this. It needs to be up and running. The system needs to be up and running by July 1 of this year. For many officers, although there is a grandfather clause if you have a collective bargaining agreement that would extend it a year, which would apply to FOP members, but not to police, county police management. Quite honestly, I'm not sure about the municipal police departments that are involved. This bill would cover the county police, obviously the deputy sheriffs, and the municipal police departments that operate in the county, which is Rockville, Gaithersburg, Tacoma Park, and Chevy Chase Village. And I believe they're all represented here. The system, which was set up by the state, not necessarily the bill, is a two-part system. A police accountability board, which can hear complaints, or can not hear complaints, can receive complaints of police misconduct. Now, the state law is a little specific on what a police misconduct is, or the type of complaint that they can hear. It's only a complaint that's received from a member of the public. So there are complaints of police misconduct that start internally. They would not be covered under the state law. And that's an important point to keep in mind. The Police Accountability Board would then, the complaints that come to the Police Accountability Board would be referred to the department, or a complaint could be filed directly with the department. The department is then required to investigate and send a written report of investigation to the Administrative Charging Committee. So this bill creates both the Police Accountability Board and the Administrative Charging Committee. The Administrative Charging Committee essentially takes the place of the Chief of Police in reviewing the investigative report and deciding whether or not disciplinary charges should be filed against the officer. The charges, the charging committee also would then recommend the discipline if they find that the charge is sustained, and or that they find not. They actually don't find it sustained. Take that back. They find that charges should be should be brought against the officer. They recommend discipline. The police chief can then offer that discipline to the officer, or greater discipline, but it has to be within a disciplinary matrix that the state Maryland Police Training Commission, I may get that name wrong, I have trouble remembering the right name. The Training Commission is going to produce. They haven't yet issued it, but they're supposed to create a disciplinary matrix, which is something along the criminal lines of the sentencing guidelines for judges, although they appear to be mandatory under this bill.
Can I interrupt just for 1 second,
Sure.
Mr. Drummer? So I've heard information, rumor from both, nothing formal, I guess it was more than rumor, but nothing formal, that their guidelines would not be mandatory. And then I've heard that their guidelines would be mandatory. So do we know for certain when that will be determined?
Well, I didn't see anything about it not being mandatory in the statute itself.
Okay.
So that's not the way I read it, but of course this is a new law that hasn't been implemented yet, and I guess there's differing opinions on what it means. But in my mind, I think it's a mandatory disciplinary matrix.
Okay.
If the police officer accepts the discipline offered by the chief of police, then it's just implemented and then we're done. If not, the case goes to a trial board, which is made up of a member appointed by the Police Accountability Board, a retired judge or of the district or circuit court, or an administrative law judge, either active or retired. I think they mean the state administrative, the state of Maryland has an office of administrative hearings. That's what I believe they're talking about for administrative law judge. And a police officer of equal rank. It's a 3-panel trial board. They would hear evidence, hear the case, make a decision, and that decision is final, subject to appeal to the circuit court, but on the record. So the trial is in front of the trial board. So that's the basic system. The administrative charging committee in state law is mandatory to be 5 people, 5 civilians. One of them is the chair of the Police Accountability Board. 2 of them are selected by the Police Accountability Board, who are not members of the Police Accountability Board. And 2 of them are selected by the county executive. That's the 5-member board. That's set in state law, and Bill 4921 simply copies that. As for the Police Accountability Board, there are no set requirements as to how many members should be on the board or what their qualifications should be. That's left up to local law. So let me start with the racial equity and social justice impact statement that we received. OLO found that the bill as drafted would have little impact on racial and social inequities concerning policing because it does not align with the best practices for advancing civilian oversight to improve police accountability. OLO found 4 major areas where this bill doesn't align with best practices. The first is that the ACC is charged with review-focused civilian oversight. They're going to review the investigation report. They're not actually going to do the investigation. I have spoken with Ms. Bonner-Tompkins about this, and we both agree that may be that it doesn't align with best practices, but that's not something that the county can change. That's the system that the state set up. So, but she pointed that out just for information purposes. Second, the second, third, and fourth issue she pointed out is something that is within the county's control. The second one is she believed the small size of the Public Accountability Board, and this bill would create a 5-member board, and the mandatory qualifications, which require, I will say that there was a lot of discussion about the qualifications at the public hearing, and that they would result in members of the police, at least former members of police management, and that would be mandatory. It's not the way the bill is written. I think there was a lot of misunderstanding of the bill. The bill is in the alternative. It requires either experience in managing or evaluating the management of a law enforcement agency, evaluating citizen complaints against a police officer, or experience in personnel disciplinary proceedings as a manager, employee representative, mediator, or arbitrator. Those are in the alternative. So it was a little somewhat misunderstood, I believe. Clearly, it's something the committee is going to need to look at carefully and probably make some changes, but I think it was misunderstood in the public hearing. That's the second issue in the racial equity, and I'm going into more detail on these later. The third is that the PAB and the ACC under the bill would not, the bill doesn't provide them with enough authority to review the majority of complaints of police misconduct made by the public. This is twofold. One, as I said, the state law limits the authority to police allegations of police misconduct brought by a member of the public, not internal complaints. But also in talking to Ms. Bonner-Tompkins, I think we had she was also believes that the bill as drafted doesn't actually require every complaint that's filed with that comes to the law enforcement agency, either directly or through the PAB, has to get investigated. I think the state law does require everything to be investigated, but when looking back at the bill as drafted, I think it needs some clarification because it isn't clear. But I think it should be clear that every complaint needs to be investigated and brought back to the ACC. Now, every complaint doesn't need to go, the ACC can find that it doesn't need to go any further, but everything should go to the ACC if, in fact, it's a complaint of police misconduct from a member of the public. The fourth issue brought up in the racial equity impact statement is that the bill does not provide enough funding to support the work of the PAB and the ACC, and suggested the bill be amended to specify staffing and budget. Again, bills do not generally specify budget and staffing for agencies. That is something that would have to be worked out in the budget. But you could put something in about that in the bill itself. So let me go through the issues. They're essentially the issues brought up by the racial equity impact statement and some of the public testimony. The first real issue, and I'm on page 5 of the memo, the staff memo, is what should the qualifications be for serving on the Police Accountability Board and the Administrative Charging Committee? I explained already what the qualifications are in the bill. That has been interpreted by many, including virtually all of the speakers at the public hearing, to mean that you had to be somebody who's worked in law enforcement throughout your career to be on the Police Accountability Board in the ACC. State law prohibits an active police officer from being a member of the board, but doesn't say anything about a former member of a former police officer. And the qualifications for both the PAB in the bill and the ACC are the same. You have to reside in the county, and the experience requirements are the same. And again, they are in the alternative. Clearly, creating a board that, well, the PAB and the ACC have two different functions. As I said, the ACC is in fact taking the place in the disciplinary process, at least in the beginning of it, of the chief of police or the assistant chief, however the department runs it. But, the internal affairs or the police department will investigate the complaint, and they send a complaint right now to the chief or the assistant chiefs that are delegated by the chief, and they make a decision on whether to go forward with discipline. Well, that's what the ACC is going to do. The ACC has the authority to issue subpoenas, to review body camera footage, and to ask for more investigation, and to ask for witnesses to come in order to make this decision. These are 5 civilians.
Can I interrupt there for 1 second,
Sure.
please? When it comes to Montgomery County, obviously Montgomery County would investigate the complaint. Since this also involves the municipalities, who would investigate their complaints?
The municipality, the municipal police department would investigate the complaint.
And
it's the law enforcement
turn it over.
agency that, however they do it now, they would investigate it.
I see. And then turn it over to this new
And they
board.
would turn it over to the administrative charging committee.
Okay.
So it's the ACC for the county. So they're not only taking the place of the county police chief, they're taking the place of the sheriff and municipal police chiefs.
Right.
For this part, I mean, they're not actually running the department, but
Right.
you understand what I say. Just for this portion of the disciplinary process. The Police Accountability Board has a more general and advisory duty, which is to review how the disciplinary system is going, keep track of statistics, how many complaints are we getting, how many get reviewed by the ACC, how many go further for charges, keeping track of things generally, but not deciding individual cases, and also providing advice to the county and the municipal police departments on things that they believe should be changed, making recommendations. In that sense, a little bit similar to the policing advisory committee that the council set up a year or so ago for the county police. However, the police advisory board, the chair of the PAB, is automatically on the ACC, or the chair is able to designate someone else on the PAB to be on the ACC. So one of the members of the PAB is automatically on the ACC. Also, two of the ACC members are going to be selected by the PAB. So, and 2 by the county executive. So the fact that the county executive will appoint members of the PAB subject to council confirmation under the law. But those members will then pick 2 of the 5 members of the ACC, and one of them is automatically. So 3/5 of the ACC is not selected by the county. It's selected by civilians. So that's where their position becomes truly important, because it's really the ACC that's doing the real work in the disciplinary process, as to an individual complaint. It's the ACC, and here you've got the PAB basically appointing the 3/5 of the ACC and not the county. So the qualifications become really important, because there's a goal here. One, you need to have people on the ACC who have the trust, I guess, of the community that they're being fair and impartial. But you also have to have people on the ACC that have the trust of the police officers, that they're getting, the police departments, that they're getting a fair and honest evaluation. So it's a lot different. This is an active board. It's a lot different than appointing a pure advisory board to just provide some recommendations to the county executive and the county council. So that's the basis of actually having qualifications in the law. And because the PAB members appoint or make up 2/3 of the ACC, it's important to have qualifications for them as well, in the same vein. However, I will have to admit that the qualifications that are written in the bill, and I have to take some credit for that, we're not seen as doing that. I mean, if you have all former police department personnel on the board, it looks like what we're doing now. Is right now we have police professionals making these disciplinary decisions, and that's not really what the state law expected. However, you do need to have people that are able to do this work. I make a correction in the alternative. I wouldn't call it the first step. It's an alternative to try and change from an experience model for qualifications to a more subjective model that isn't objective, what experience that you have, but to be able to demonstrate the capacity to objectively evaluate an investigation report and prepare a reasonable charging decision based solely on the evidence before the committee. That's the goal. It can be shown by other things besides experience, but that's what you really want. You want people that are that have the capacity to objectively evaluate the report and prepare a reasonable charging decision based solely on the evidence that's in front of them, and not based on bias or preconceived notions of what happened, based on the evidence itself. I have in the packet here that Councilmember Girondo supported that bill. I think I got that wrong. I misunderstood what he said. Councilmember Girondo, just to be clear, I know he's not here today because he's in another committee meeting. He supports taking out all the qualifications, not putting in anything to substitute. He also supports prohibiting a former police officer from being a member of the committee or the PAB. Just to be clear as to what Councilmember Girondo supported. I got that wrong in the packet. So that's the first issue is, do you want to keep the qualifications that are there? Do you want to change the qualifications? If so, what do you want to change them to? Or do you want to just eliminate them?
Okay.
I can go on, or if you want to talk about.
No, we're gonna stop as we go through this. First off, I did want to announce we are going to have a hard stop at 11. So We will go until 11, but we will have to stop at 11. And Council President Albernaz would like to speak, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Drummer, for that overview. It's helpful on a lot of different levels to better understand sort of where we are in the decisions that we have to make. I do have some broader questions. So, because some of this, it sounds like, is left a little bit to interpretation of what the state has enacted, which is understandable. And we are one of, every county in the state of Maryland is having a similar conversation to the one we are having right now. And my understanding is that some counties have actually already moved forward with their recommended plan and are beginning the recruitment process. Acknowledging we have some discretion, which is a good thing, to determine the size of this entity, and then go through deliberation and discussion on the qualifications. Is there a best practice? Is there some uniformity that you're aware of that other counties and jurisdictions are following? Is there any context that we may be able to derive from? We want to do what's right for Montgomery County, clearly, and our jurisdiction is different than every other jurisdiction. But I am also curious as to what this looks like in other jurisdictions, not as a guide, just as a data point that I think is somewhat relevant and maybe helpful. I also think it would be helpful to have, whether it's somebody from Melanie Winger's shop or somebody directly from Annapolis or a colleague who was responsible for deriving the bill, just to hear and better understand from that context as well, because we're making at least some understandable and reasonable assumptions on the intent. But I think it may be beneficial for us to hear from folks that were directly on the ground to confirm that our assumptions are accurate. And so I think that might be helpful. I also think that it would be helpful, Mr. Chair, for us to hear, and I appreciate Mr. Drummer's summary of Dr. Bonner Tompkins's really great work, but I think it'd be helpful for us to hear directly from Dr. Bonner Tompkins. And then, of course, I know this is always in the queue, hearing from the other stakeholders here. And we also have received recommendations from the Police Advisory Commission appointed by the council. And I think moving forward in a future work session, it may be beneficial to have a representative from that body be part of this conversation, because we've, of course, empowered them to be our eyes and ears and a bridge between the community. I had the good fortune of attending their most recent meeting just last week, and I was immensely impressed with the level of depth of their discussion and really appreciated the thoughtful approach that they have taken. So I'd like to make that recommendation, Mr. Chair, if we can have a representative speak to the specific recommendations they've made regarding the Police Advisory Board. And just two other general comments as we dive into this. One, I was pretty blown away at the applications that we received for the Council Police Advisory Commission. We received hundreds of applications, and I would say almost all of them met at least the minimum criteria we were looking for, and most of them exceeded it. And so we are fortunate in our community here to have some people who have a wide array of experiences and expertise and do absolutely represent the communities who are disproportionately impacted by what we're trying to ensure we prevent moving forward. So I think we should have faith that there are a lot of talented individuals here in Montgomery County, regardless of what we decide the criteria will be. There are a lot more people that are going to be eligible for that criteria than there are not. And there's obviously a lot of interest in this issue. And I would also, Mr. Chair, I would appreciate hearing from Chief Jones and Dr. Stoddard and the executive branch generally about their position on this. And I also finally, and I know I'm throwing a lot out here, I'd like to better understand what exactly the role of the council is beyond the development of the legislation itself. what the role of the council is once the legislation is enacted on oversight, review. What does that look like? Because we're spending a lot of time on the front end as we need to and should right now, but I am curious in the back end moving forward what our role is in all of this. So I yield back to you, Mr. Chair. I know I packed a lot of questions there and suggestions, but
yes, you did, all of which were good suggestions. And I think what we're going to do is I'd like to turn to Dr. Bonner Tompkins next, and then Mr. Drummer, if you could be thinking about the role that the council will have following this. Obviously, we're going to have a budgetary role, but that's beyond this absolute legislation. I mean, we have to guarantee, as I have said many times, if you're going to ask somebody to do a job, you need to give them the resources to do it. After that, then I'm going to turn to Chief Jones and to Dr. Stoddard to hear their comments as well. So with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Bonner Tompkins if she would please give her thoughts on this.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Bob pretty much summarized what I included in the racial equity and social justice statement, so I appreciate that. Just to reiterate, in the statement, we made recommendations around increasing the independence of the Police Accountability Board, and that would include increasing the size of the membership so that it can be as diverse panel as the county is. In particular, include members of communities that are disproportionately impacted by policing. And so that can include increasing the size of it. And we did reference the Police Advisory Commission as having a larger membership and requiring members to have either interest or expertise in policing matters as an eligibility requirement. We also recommended increasing the authority of the Police Accountability Board, and in particular amendments, as Bob shared, around making sure that any external complaints, whether they come through the PAB or through any of the police departments, including the municipalities, that those flow through to the PAB and not just those that are going to be subject to whether an officer should be charged or not. And then, as already referenced, that the PAB would need resources to be able to do its job well. So that was really, those were really the 3 points that were emphasized in the racial equity and social justice statement. And I'm just echoing, Bob made a great summary of what was in there.
Thank you. Mr. Drummer, you jumped on my screen again. Mr. Drummer, do you have any comment on what our role would be beyond, once we do the legislation, what the council's role would be once we beyond the legislation?
Well, the council's role, there's several roles. You will be confirming the appointees to the Police Accountability Board. So you have a role in making sure that members of the Police Accountability Board are qualified to do the job we're asking them to do. You, of course, have a role in amending this legislation after it's enacted if there are areas that don't seem to be working well that can be changed by county law. But most importantly, I think you have the budgetary responsibility to make sure that the PAB and the ACC are adequately funded and I believe they're going to need professional staff that's just working for them to do this job correctly. Not just, so that's going to require money. And, this is going to be this is another state unfunded mandate, essentially. This is going to cost money to do it right, and you need to do it right. So I think that's probably the biggest role for the council, is to make sure that the resources are there to do the job correctly.
Okay. I'm going to turn to Chief Jones. Right afterwards, I'm going to go to Dr. Stoddard. And then we have the 4 municipalities that are represented here today. Chief Soroka from Gaithersburg, Chief Duvall from Tacoma Park, Chief Fitzgerald from Chevy Chase Village, and Deputy Chief Lanham from Rockville. If any of them have a comment after Dr. Stoddard, then I'm going to turn to you as well. So you can be thinking if you have a comment. Chief Jones, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Katz, and thank you to the Public Safety Committee for having us here today. I only really have a couple of points. I really will defer to Dr. Stoddard from the County Executive's Office to address the bill itself. I will just say that I think that the state law that in its own right is intention is good. But from the standpoint that I think that what must be noted here, I think that it was noted by Mr. Drummer, is that no matter who is selected to be on this board and to be a part of the charging committee, but fair and equitable treatment by all of our officers that are being that the complaints are being lodged against. That needs to be a part of this. That needs to be the backbone of the treatment of employees. As you know, as we have gone through the discipline process and work with for example, here in Montgomery County Police and work with the FOP, that is really what is at the root of when you deal with discipline, that you're treating your employees with fair and equitable treatment. And I think that the individuals who are selected must really be obligated to those 2 basic functions. Anybody who comes in with a very biased approach to finding people guilty before all of the evidence is presented presents an unfair system. And I would just suggest that, you know, as this is being addressed, that at the end of the day, employees are treated with justly in Montgomery County, as I would hope that if they're, as we proclaim to be the leaders in many areas, that we will be the leaders and not be the leaders in unbiased treatment of our police officers. So I would just start with that. The other piece about really extending this outside of the external complaints and having the board to look at all internal, I think that's a problem. There's a significant amount of different issues that occur within our departments that are performance issues that are really not that should be under the auspices of the police chiefs or the sheriffs of these agencies, so that they can address their employees. There are also other things that happen internally that needs to be addressed within the house, and I really do believe that it is you hire chiefs of police for your agencies that are represented here by the board or elected officials. And I believe that at some point that you should have the confidence in them that you would allow them to address the issues that are happening inside their agencies. It happens with all other governmental agencies that are part of county government, that discipline is addressed in that manner. And I think in this regard that we should also be allowed to have some control to address, as we deal with our officers and how we address discipline issues and how we think best operationally we can actually address these issues to make our departments more efficient and again, still treating people in a fair and just manner. So I'll pause there and I'll pass it to Dr. Stoddard.
Good morning, Chairman Katz. Good morning, members of the council, of the committee. Appreciate having us here. I want to say a couple things on opening. We agree with the large critique that the bill was insufficient as submitted, meaning we knew when we sent it over that it was not going to address all the needs that were addressed, that they needed to address. We sent it over as a vehicle to begin the public process to allow for further clarification and addition to the bill, recognizing that we do have the timeline that Council President Albornoz referred to, where we essentially have 5 months to hire staff, however those are decided, members, have the members appoint ACC members, et cetera, receive training. There's a lot of steps that have to take place after the council enacts the bill, and we wanted to start that process sooner than later, rather than delay. We could have done a more collegial community building process and not gotten the bill over to the council until February or March, in which case we never would have met the timeline either. So it sort of was a choice to expedite to a public process. But we agree the county executive would not have supported the bill that he sent over as drafted, recognizing that there needed to be changes. There are also some things that should be clear, that there are pieces of this that are likely going to have to change once the Maryland Public Police Standards and Training Commission develops the regulations that we believe are coming. We've been told that those regulations, if enacted, will provide some structure to how PABs, ACCs, and as Mr. Drummond alluded to, the disciplinary matrix function. And so obviously if those create conflicts between whatever's passed by the county council and the state, then we'll have to adjudicate which of those we have to follow according to state law. And obviously the county attorney and the council attorneys will be able to give us guidance on that. But obviously we'll have to align those to the extent possible. And that obviously may not come until April or May from what we've been told, which is very problematic. Now, on the points that Council President Albornoz, I think many of the points raised by both public testimony and Mr. Drummer are totally reasonable. I think expansion of the PAB to include more members, totally reasonable. I think Mr. Drummer alluded to the intent in terms of the qualifications. I think we can eliminate the qualifications or modify the qualifications substantially and address it through the selection process to ensure that the members of the PAB and therefore the ACC are going to reflect the ability to conduct the business as required in a fair and equitable manner. Obviously, our part of the reason why we included the criteria we did was to ensure that they could that you weren't going to have the staff of the committee deciding the outcome because they were, teeing up the members who weren't capable of themselves fairly and justly looking at the evidence, subpoenaing witnesses, questioning witnesses, etc. But we do believe that, as Council President Albornoz said, there are many members of our public who are capable of doing that, and so changing the requirements is a totally reasonable thing. On staffing, we agree in full with the comments made by the public. The staffing for the PAB and ACC should be robust and appropriate. We just believe that the PAB and ACC members themselves should have some role in dictating what the staffing for their organization should be. And rather, so if the council is going to prescribe, they should prescribe a floor, not a ceiling for funding and staffing, because obviously we want them to feel like they have an investment in the process, that they can dictate, we need this expertise and this staffing based on our own internal expertise to our members, and let the PAB and ACC members themselves have a large role in recommending a budget allocation for themselves. Independence of attorney. The original drafting of this bill did include an independent counsel, but obviously the charter precludes that from happening as structured. And so we would support, we do support a charter amendment to allow them to have independent counsel, or some of the alternate suggestions that have come up around the assignment of a special counsel essentially for the PAB and ACC. Totally reasonable suggestions. We agree with them having independence of counsel. I think we haven't gotten to the compensation issue. Have no issue with the compensation of PAB or ACC members. Totally think that's appropriate. Obviously, the one conflict being that you can't be duly compensated needs to be worked out. And so if that could be worked out, no objection from the executive on some of those requirements. The last thing I will say is I know that Chief Fitzgerald has actually been sitting on the work group at making recommendations around the ACC regulations. So he may have some helpful insights on how that's coming and how that may influence this process. But I'm sure the municipal chiefs will have lots of comments. I do know, however, there is some conversation about whether there will be a severability allowance for the municipalities to have their own PABs and ACCs. That's a conversation that we've heard is at least being discussed in Annapolis. And so obviously it is possible that there could be a allowance for them to form their own separate PABs and ACCs, which we've expressed no objection to from the executive branch in terms of if they, we would prefer to know sooner than later what's going to be included in the PAB and ACC for the county. But obviously flexibility for the municipalities is reasonable as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And on my list, then I'm going to ask if they have a comment. I forgot to mention my friend, Chief Deputy from the Sheriff's Department, Chief Deputy Wade. So didn't mean to do that to you, Max. Sorry. And also to Mr. Drummer, and I'm going to turn to the other chiefs or deputy chiefs. Mr. Drummer, how about Maryland National Capital Park and planning? How do they fit into this?
They don't. Both WSSC Police and Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Committee Police are under the state PAB and the state ACC because they span more than one county. The General Assembly took them out of the county PAB and put them into an overall state PAB. So they're not part of this.
Very good. Thank you. I just thought of that. So with that, to our friends from the municipalities and other organizations, does anyone have a comment? Chief Fitzgerald, I had a feeling you might raise your hand. Please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you and welcome as well.
Thank you. And good morning, members of the Public Safety Committee. Just a couple quick things. To go back to your early question, Mr. Chairman, a part of the bill, House Bill 670, the state bill, I should say, does make the disciplinary matrix mandatory. The Training and Standards Commission will develop it and then expressly mandates that every law enforcement agency shall adopt it. It is not at all discretionary unless they make a change in this session. And as Dr. Stoddard mentioned, yes, I was a member of the work group that was drafting proposed regulations, COMAR regs, to implement this law. And what the Training and Standards Commission has decided to do is to call some special meetings in order to get this done. They would only generally meet quarterly, and that's not good enough to get this done in a timely way. So I'm hopeful that something will happen in the early spring to get this out. And then lastly, and of greatest importance to me and perhaps to my municipal colleagues, is that I can tell you that I am absolutely not comfortable, and I don't think any police leader would be comfortable ceding control over personnel matters to anybody. But that is the structure of the state law. So this is our reality, and I understand that, and we are trying to make it work. So doing that means that I am not directly accountable for discipline, of course, and I cede control to another body. But there's another layer here because the body itself is not of this municipality. We are now ceding control to a municipality that is a creation of a combination of the county executive and then the county council. And so on volume, of course, the Montgomery County Police will generate the largest share of complaints just because of the sheer number of their personnel. And so one of my concerns, I'll speak in the first person, I don't want to take anybody else's ideas, but the chance of the Administrative Charging Committee members seeing things through a county lens based upon county expectations and county police procedures is very real, and there will have to be some effort whenever one of our local municipal police officer disciplinary complaints comes through the pipeline, that we make sure that the culture and the procedures and the expectations of the local jurisdictions is not somehow subsumed and presumed to be consistent with Montgomery County, because there is a great deal of consistency, but there is not universal consistency. And the culture of our agency and the expectation of our agency is very, very different. And it links to the mandatory nature of the matrix. Since the matrix says everybody must adopt it, it also says that when the ACC decides what box to put that disciplinary matter in, the chief executive of the law enforcement agency can offer that or something higher, but nothing lower. And right now, there is no off-ramp to a disciplinary matter that is not accepted by a police officer without going through a trial board. There is no settlement negotiations in this law. We have drafted regulations to allow for that. if it is adopted, the regulations as they are proposed would take a proposed settlement negotiation and put it right back to the ACC for their ratification or rejection. So ultimately, it respects the public nature of discipline, but without a settlement negotiation procedure, this whole system will collapse under its own weight. And with that, I will cede back to the group.
Thank you very much, Chief. I have also heard that there is the possibility that because the rules have not been developed yet, that they're going to change the deadline on when this has to begin. Have you heard that?
Very seriously doubt that, Mr. Chairman. I do not see any appetite in the legislature to defer the implementation date because it is, I'll just stop there. I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay. So
Chairman, we did talk to the members of the delegation, and they did not express, as Chief Fitzgerald alluded to, did not express interest in changing the timeline. They recognize that it may be difficult to implement by July 1st, and they appreciate that. Just so we talk about this clearly, there may also be a little bit of a buffer built in because any investigation conducted, obviously the offense has to occur after July 1, then there would be an investigation. So there's a little bit of a lead time in terms of the investigative process, which can last several months itself, before there would be a file for which the ACC would be involved. So there's a little bit of buffer built in there, but to be clear, talking to members of the delegation, there is very little appetite to modify the timeline legislatively.
Thank you. All right, and that clears that up. The other problem with it, and we're going to hear from the other municipalities if they would like, but part of the problem is that this is not a one-size-fits-all for the counties. I mean, Howard County does not have any municipalities. Baltimore County has no municipalities. So, for everybody, and Prince George's County has, I don't know, how many different agencies they have inside who have police agencies inside Prince George's County is a very large number. It is for the state to say that everybody's going to be treated, the same here. It's not the same. So
and one of the basic reasons why local municipalities stand up their own police department is for local control,
right,
over that service. And so this is a sea change when it comes to that.
All right, any other chief or deputy chief want to jump in? Okay. So with that, Mr. Drummer, and I haven't heard from Councilmember Hawker. Did you want to jump in on this before we get back into Mr. Drummer here?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, I guess we'll get to the individual amendments, in due time. But yeah, no, I'm struggling to figure out what to say. It feels like I'm in Alice in Wonderland. I've never seen an executive branch official say the county executive doesn't support a bill the county executive sent us with his name at the top. That was the charge that they were given, and it puts the council, all of us, not just this committee, in a really strange position. I definitely agree for the next work section we should have OIR here and any state lawmakers that were involved in the drafting. And on Mr. Drummer's point on the resources, Governor Hogan certainly has proposed considerable funding for policing from the state. And regardless of how you feel about that, I'm wondering if any of that can be used to fund the state mandate in HB 670. If not, the Assembly right now, it's still January, they have plenty of authority to make it so. And we should not just be absorbing an unfunded mandate from the state if we don't have to. We should be applying for those funds and trying to use those to stand it up, in my view. And I'm also glad, Mr. Chairman, we have reps from the management, our employee organizations, wondering if we, for the next work session, could have community leaders here that could respond to some of the questions that come up, because we're having to do, I think, an unfair amount of work on this bill after a lot of meetings that have gone forward. I agree with the council president about including the Police Advisory Commission for sure, but we've also heard from many community organizations that represent people that are impacted by policing disproportionately. It would certainly be helpful to me if we could include some of their voices. And I guess I have thoughts on the specific amendments, but I'll wait for those.
Okay. Thank you. I agree with that. We need, this legislation is a very difficult, I always talk about the puzzle has to fit together. There are so many different pieces of this puzzle that need to fit together. And getting back to the basic discussion that has been said by many others, including Chief Jones, these boards need to be fair. Nobody wants anybody to believe that from either side, from the public side or from the policing side, that someone would be treated unfairly during these types of hearings. It's not, we don't do that in the judicial system, and we certainly should not be doing that and will not be doing that during this system. So it is necessary we take our time, though we are under a tremendous time crunch in order to get this accomplished. And we will get it done. And obviously, if possible, and I'm turning to our staff, I think we're probably going to have to meet on this once a week or whatever we can do to get this done, because we can't just say, oh, we'll get back to this in a couple weeks. This has to get done, because we're going to have to advertise for all of the, as Council President said, all of the very qualified people who should be considered. We have to then consider them. And as we all know, that takes time to do. This is something that we are under a tremendous time constraint. And if they're not going to extend the time, and I understand why they wouldn't, but if they're not, then we need to make certain that we do it right and that we do it on time. So with that, Council President Albernaz, I keep forgetting your title as I start to speak.
Yeah,
Go ahead, please.
Dave is fine.
Yeah, I got you.
So just a couple of follow-up items, and this is going to be a question for the executive branch. This isn't the only thing going on right now. There's a lot on the executive branch's plate on a number of different levels. We're trying to sustain operations through some unprecedented and extraordinary challenges. And the collaboration between the executive branch and the legislative branch is always important, but particularly here, so that we comply with the deadlines and don't rush through this, both on the legislative side as we enact the guidelines and the policies that will dictate where we go from here, but also in onboarding these really, these folks who are, I'm sure, going to be very talented. Dr. Stoddard, could you talk a little bit about what some of the steps the administration plans to take to put our foot on the gas here within reason to onboard people? I know this will be a priority, but if you could just assure the public that it will be, and the team of individuals within the executive branch who are going to be charged with implementing this, could you talk a little bit about what that looks like? And be candid. I know that obviously there are a number of things going on, but do you need any additional resources or help beyond just what we're literally talking about here, and but to be able to get this through when it needs to be through?
So we've already started on a few things. So, for example, the budgetary process for an NDA, a standalone NDA for the Police Accountability Board and ACC has already begun with Office of Management and Budget. We have, we're trying to look at other processes. We're studying other processes for recruitment and selection, like back-end systems, application systems, so we have something that's ready. Now, obviously, the tricky thing is not knowing necessarily how the council is going to change things. It's a little bit difficult to build a lot of those things in the front end. I think my biggest concern is, some of the comments we've heard from advocates are that, once the process, have the process open for a long time, once members are going to be nominated by the executive, have a long period of public comment on those members. Now, obviously, all those things are important, but also very difficult given the timeline that we have. So we're trying to figure out the best way to balance out having public engagement on the nomination selection process, recognizing that the PAB then selects members for the ACC, which is a sequential process that can't happen until the PAB is nominated and confirmed. So I think that's the biggest problem. Now, once the NDA is in place, we'll be able to start presumably creating some of the positions. I think we've talked about an executive director. I think everyone would agree that there needs to be an executive director for a committee like this. Start to look at the kinds of position criteria that need to exist given parallels like the Ethics Commission or the MS PB. things like that. So we have already begun the process of looking at those sorts of creating positions, things like that. So I think we're happy to move along in a more expedited process. But I think, I think the bigger concern that we have is the prescribed nomination process and how long that will take relative to when the PAB has to be in place and how they will create a system to select ACC members. That I don't think will be the process, as well as any additional training requirements that the council may add beyond what the Police Standards and Training Commission itself develops. And so there are a few things that are sort of up in the air that we struggle with, but we have begun some of the back end processes that would need to take place regardless of how the council chooses to act on the individual requirements.
Thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Chairman, I just want to associate myself with your comments regarding the need to do this expeditiously, and if necessary to have to do this every week. That's what we're just going to have to do so that we can provide a long enough runway for this to be successful and set up for success from day one. I really appreciate Chief Fitzgerald's comments and appreciate his leadership and understand, as you said, Mr. Chairman, that this can't be necessarily a one-size-fits-all, because we do have to take into account the relationship that our municipalities have with their local communities. And this could end up creating more harm than good if that relationship that they've worked so hard to establish over many generations is somehow compromised. And I also think, as has been noted, but I just want to underscore, this can't be an us versus them. And I don't know who the us is, and I don't know who the them is. But if this doesn't have the support, or if there is a perception on either side that this is not a fair or equitable process, then the whole thing will cave in on itself, and we will create more problems than we're trying to solve. We have very real recruitment and retention issues right now. They are real within law enforcement. And so we can act all the best policies in the world, but unless we're recruiting people and retaining people who have in their DNA what we're looking for, and the pool of people that we recruit becomes so small as we compete with other neighboring jurisdictions that it's diminished even further, then that doesn't help anyone. But we also need to underscore that there is trust that has to be maintained, and a lot of work that's been done at both the state and local level to help reinforce or establish that trust, which has been whittled away, that we have to be honest about as well in a lot of different communities. So there's a lot of competing. It is a puzzle. That's a good way of putting it. And I don't know that we're going to end up with legislation that's going to satisfy everyone. I suspect we are not. But we're going to get as close to the middle as we can here, taking into account all of those respective factors. And finally, I do want to associate myself once again with Council Member Hucker's recommendation to hear from our friends in labor, again, to ensure that all voices feel heard here, and that we expand the base a little bit, or the discussion, to include some of these really active community organizations who've done really great work and are doing a lot of really great due diligence. So that we're on the clock here, and this is obviously critically important. But I think this work session and the framework of it was really important, both to set the tone and set expectations about what future work sessions are going to look like. And I know that a number of our colleagues wanted to attend this session but as you said, it was scheduled during another session. I think moving forward, it would be great, if at all possible, I know it's tight, to schedule these, at least some of these work sessions at a time that don't compete with other committee sessions. It'll just help us on the front end before we get to full council, so we can really hit the ground running. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Thank you, and I agree with that as well. Let me state again, if any of the people on this call, not just the chiefs and deputy chiefs, but anybody on this call, if you would like to speak, we certainly will hear from you. And just please raise your hand. So keeping that in mind, we have, I think, a full 18 minutes left before our hard stop. So with that, back to Mr. Drummer. Do you want to lead us through the packet to have suggestions for the suggested amendments? Where do you think we should go from here on this?
Well, if you're not ready to make decisions on qualifications, I can move on and we can talk about the other issues so that everybody knows where we're going.
You know, I think for qualifications, and I've heard from several people, though I do believe that Council President's observation that on that discussion, we probably need anyone who of the council members who could attend, who would like to attend, should be able to attend, and to have competing interests on this for this meeting is not fair. So I think we'll need to. That should be the first topic of our next work session. So please, yeah, if you can continue.
Okay.
If my colleagues disagree with me, I know they're not shy. They will tell me that. So anyhow, go ahead.
Next issue, I'm on page 7 of the memo, is should the PAB and the ACC handle complaints of police misconduct that do not originate from a member of the public? Couple of points here. One is the state law is limited to just complaints of alleged misconduct coming from a member of the public. So the council doesn't have, you know, I don't believe the council has the authority to mandate internal complaints for the municipal police departments. I think, you know, we're getting our authority from that state law, and the state law is limited to external complaints. As for the county police and the sheriffs are in a slightly different situation, but as for the county police, the council might be able to do that, but it would have to amend the county labor relations law because it's probably subject to collective bargaining. If it's not mandated by the state law, it's probably subject to collective bargaining. The one argument for leaving that alone is let's set up the system we need to for the state and worry about other complaints. I mean, other internal complaints later. You already heard from our county police chief that he feels that it shouldn't be included in, internal complaints, that you should leave that up to the individual officers. That seems to be what the state wanted. And I know it does create some awkwardness with possibly a dual system. But really what the state law is concerned about and what the citizen oversight is concerned about is just complaints of misconduct coming from members of the public. So I can stop there. I can move on to the next one, which was somewhat related.
Well, if I believe, and I'd like to hear from my colleagues, but I believe that you are correct, that we do not have the authority under this legislation, especially for municipalities, but even for our own police force, for our own being the Montgomery County Police Force, I agree. We don't have the authority under this legislation, and therefore I'm fine not, moving on from that. I don't know whether Council President or Councilmember Hucker are in agreement with what I'm saying.
Do we have any opinion from the county attorney or anybody on that matter? That's a legal question. Is Haley's here?
Yeah. So I think
Off the window, sorry.
I think that the legislation definitely would not give authority to legislate for the municipalities. And I believe that, not having seen an exact proposal, I think that doing it for the Montgomery County Police would also have a bargaining component that would have to be addressed. It couldn't just be legislated through this bill to make that change.
Thanks.
Gabe, are you, Council President?
No, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. It does, so with regards to the municipalities, but that opens up a Pandora's box in terms of collective bargaining. And that's another significant bucket of discussion that is beyond just what we're talking about at hand in terms of the subject matter. Just general, there are a lot of people who are going to have a lot to say about that, understandably. And so that just adds another layer to this that is going to be really important to this conversation and that we can't ignore.
Well, are you suggesting that we have the discussion about that, or do you believe that we don't have the authority under this legislation?
Well, it sounds like we don't have the authority. If I'm hearing you correct, Ms. Roberts, that unless separately we open up the issue of collective bargaining in this context, but it's a bigger issue than just this context, then that would have to happen on a parallel track. I assume that would also involve our Government Operations Committee as well, not just the Public Safety Committee, just in terms of general practice. Is that accurate to Bob or the team?
Well, I will say that when the council mandated the use of force policy, the council also took bargaining over that out of the scope of collective bargaining. That's for the county police. I don't think there's any question that we have no authority to mandate how discipline is going to happen on internal complaints for any of the municipal departments, and probably not for the sheriff either, because the sheriff's in an unusual situation. The county bargains with the deputy sheriffs for wages and benefits, but not for other matters, which would include discipline. The sheriff is the employer for under state law. So I'm not sure we would have the authority for the sheriffs either. I think as to the municipal and sheriffs, we're deriving any authority we have is coming from this state law, and the state law only involves external complaints. For county police, you might be able to, there's debate about that. I know my opinion is the council can take subjects out of collective bargaining. I'm sure Mr. Holland disagrees with that. I can see him nodding, and there's been litigation over that. I personally don't recommend you even start with that. I think you really just need to work on implementing the state law on the external complaints. The police chief doesn't want you to involve internal complaints. I suspect Mr. Holland doesn't want you to do that either. And I don't really see the usefulness of doing that. So I think there may be some authority to do it. I don't recommend it. I think you should just move on and just try and implement the state law as it's written. And if later everybody decides that this is such the system is working really well, and people want to add internal complaints, at least as to the county, or even municipalities want to do that, you can do it later, but I think you need to set up the system that the state wanted and get that running.
Just, Mr. Chair, just for whatever it's worth, I'm one of 3 votes here. I agree. I think this is a heavy enough lift on its own that there, with a lot of layers to this, and again, in the interest of wanting to set this up for success, and in the interest of taking the long view, implementing this and implementing it well, that creates trust on all sides, will then, I think, open the door to other phased-in approaches in terms of its scope. But I think that's right, just because there's a lot here, and there would be a lot to unpack.
I agree with what you just said, Councilmember Hawker.
I do too. It sounds like it's not in our purview.
Very good. And I did see FA President Lee Holland raised his hand.
Well, I was going to talk before. Sorry that I didn't get a chance to, but President Aronez is right. I mean, we shouldn't be doing this. This would be ripe for litigation. I think we just should move on and implement the House Bill 670 the way it's supposed to be, which was external complaints from citizens, and leave internal alone. A lot, as Chief Jones said, is performance matters that aren't external complaints that should be dealt with internally. So thank you.
Thank you. We have enough on our plate not to look for an additional item to put on it. So at this point, we need to move on. So I think that's a 3-0 that we're moving on, Mr. Drummer, please.
Okay, thank you.
On that issue.
Can we note that there's an area that Mr. Holland and I agree with?
A historical moment. All right, sounds good.
The next thing is, should law enforcement agencies investigate every complaint that comes from a member of the public of police misconduct and report its findings to the ACC. This is something that was brought out in the racial equity statement. And when I talked to Ms. Bonner Tompkins about this, and my first thought was, well, of course it's already in the bill. But when I looked at the bill, it really wasn't. I think she brought up a good point. I think the state law requires every complaint that fits the description in the state law to be investigated and sent back to the ACC. I don't think the department has the authority to say, nah, we don't think this is serious enough. We're not going to give it to the ACC. So I would recommend that we just clarify that. And I've got some suggested language on page 8 of the staff report.
I'm in agreement with you as well. I believe that this is the state law that says that all means all, and so therefore I'm in agreement. I'm looking at page 8 of the packet, and I'm assuming you're talking about line 199 of the bill. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, it's just the statement that says the law enforcement agency must investigate and submit a written investigation report to the Administrative Charging Committee for each complaint received by the agency or referred to the agency by the Police Accountability Board. I think that's the intent. The agency can come back and say, well, we don't think this is a violation of our policies or whatever they want to say, but they need to investigate it, send back a report, and then the ACC will do what they do with it. But I don't think the department can say, well, we think this is insignificant. We're just going to eat it and let it go, and we're not going to investigate it. And I'm not saying they do that now.
I appreciate what you're saying. I'm in agreement with what has been suggested on page 8 to add those following line after line 199 of the bill. Council President and Council Member Hucker, are you okay with that, or do you have other discussions?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, all right. So now we are now at 10:55. We have a hard stop at 11 o'clock. Do we want to discuss how many members should be on the Police Advisory Board, or should we pick that up for next time? I'm just.
There's a lot of agreement on that one.
Yeah, I'm just as an aside, whether we pick it up for next time or not, I believe it should be expanded. Mm-hmm. I don't believe there's any. Now, what that number should be, I agree it should be an odd number. I mean, all of those, we've had suggestions for a variety of numbers, I guess, but I certainly believe that this should be expanded. And I see the FOP president has his hand up, please.
Yes, sir. Sorry, shouldn't the word external complaint be there, not complaint? Shouldn't it be external complaints?
You're back to one after 199.
Well,
yes.
I don't think it needs to be, because there's a definition of complaint in the bill that includes external complaints.
Understood. Thank you. Just want to clarify. Thanks.
Good question. Thank you. So we'll get back to the how many members should be on the Police Advisory Board. Any other comments on that? We have a whole 3 minutes. I'm holding us to the hard stop here.
I'd suggest 9, Mr. Chairman. We have, so many talented people we've seen in one commission after another, like the Redistricting Commission, so many talented people. If you have a little bit larger commission, it's going to be more likely to reflect all the communities of the county and to be able to function if there's a couple people that are out as well. So I would just, make that suggestion.
Okay. And that was you see enough numbers on this, but that, Dr. Bonner Tompkins, that was your suggestion as well, was 9. Was that correct? I can see you trying to get off mute. I can see that. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I did not make a specific.
You did not. Oh, I read it somewhere. I don't know where I read it then, but I saw a 9 someplace.
Councilmember Jawando recommended 7. That's in the packet.
Okay. And Council, Mr. FOP President, I know you all sent him 7 as well, right?
Correct. And the addition to that would be that each council district would have a representative. So 7 for the new 7 districts.
Right. Okay. Council President, do you have any?
I look forward to taking this back up again because we only have 2 minutes left. I'm okay with 9. 9 seems reasonable. 7 does too. I don't have a strong preference of one over the other. We do obviously want to keep it manageable because if you have too many cooks, I've been on boards like that. But I also think that we do need to be prepared for the practical reality that, and we experienced this on the Police Advisory Commission. We've already had at least 2 members not be able to move forward because they couldn't comply with the time commitment. So, just something to bear in mind and have a deeper bench in the event that something like that would happen so that they can continue their important work and have there be continuity of service is really important just as a practical matter. So 7 or 9, I don't have a strong opinion on, but either I'd be fine with.
And I'm fine with either 7 or 9 as well. I think that's a workable number. I do believe that even when you say that whatever that number ends up being, people don't show up. There's a variety of reasons that are legitimate that they can't be at a meeting or whatnot. And so you need a higher number than what was suggested in the original legislation. All right, with that, we're coming to that hard stop. Mr. Drummer, if possible, could we please, and hopefully we can do something next week as well. I don't know the schedule and I don't know how it could fit in, but it's my desire to get this done because we need to get it done. If we could invite the many people that have been suggested for our next meeting, if we could, if possible, have it as was suggested, not during a time when other committee meetings are meeting, so that our other colleagues, if they choose to be with us, could be here. And if we could set aside enough time for our committee, and we're going to need commitment from both Council President and Councilmember Hucker as well. And of course, everybody is busy, so I appreciate this, that they could be there for the entire time so that we can keep moving forward as best and as quickly as we can, but as correctly as we can on this very, very important topic. If all of that is a possibility, and I know, Mr. Drummer, you have nothing else to do, so that'll give you plenty to do.
I would just ask that if the committee members have people that they would like to be invited, if they would just send me names and contact information, that would be a little quicker, and then I will certainly invite them.
Very good. Okay, are we good?
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you all very, very much for being with us. This is a process that we are dedicated to make certain that it's going to be as fair and as transparent and as it can possibly be for all sides. And that's our commitment. So with that, we are going to say thank you for being with us. We are adjourned.
And have alcoholic beverages safely within the borders of those parks.
Concerns about park safety have been allayed by the results of the initial pilot program.
All the response we got was positive. We got no negative response at all. No calls to police for service,